Hey there, I'm Jason Biddle, and I'm writing a book about animals for National Geographic, and today I want to talk to you about a mysterious animal discovered in New York recently. Also, just a quick warning that there will be a picture of a dead animal, so maybe skip this one if that's not your thing. To set the scene, it was December in central New York, and the year was 2021. A hunter had just killed a very large coyote, which was totally legal given the state's laws. However, there was something weird about this critter. Namely, it looked a heck of a lot like a wolf. For a little bit of context, the gray wolf used to be native to all of Canada, most of the United States, a large portion of Mexico, but was systematically obliterated across much of this continent because everyone from European settlers to the US government wanted them dead. And, well, they succeeded. Now, what's interesting is that at about the same time, coyotes used to be present only in the West. And though lots of people have tried to eradicate this species too, they have failed utterly and miserably again and again. By the way, you'll be able to read more about how coyotes can't be killed by conventional weapons in the book I'm currently writing, but all you need to know right now is that rather than going gently into that good night, coyotes did the foxtrot across the continent and can now be found in places coyotes have never been before. Coyote habitat now includes basically all of the East Coast, from Florida to Maine, and even rooftops in Queens, giving new meaning to the term bridge and tunnel crowd. All of which is to say, if a hunter shot a coyote in New York State, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But a wolf, that might be a horse of a different color. And fuel to the fire was the fact that the animal in question weighed in at a whopping 85 pounds. And since most of us don't interact with wolves or coyotes on the daily, let alone at the same time, I'll just remind you here that in general, wolves are about twice the size of coyotes, which usually max out at about 50 pounds. And this is where things get even stranger. When the New York Department of Environmental Conservation commissioned a DNA test on the animal, they announced that the curious canid most closely identified as an eastern coyote. Now, that could have been where our saga ended, except not everyone bought the coyote explanation, maybe because the DEC neglected to make the results of its DNA test available to the public. So folks with environmental groups and the media started submitting Freedom of Information Act requests and even reached out to the hunter to obtain tissue samples from the animal so that they could order DNA tests of their own. And wouldn't you know, when the first of these tests came back, the results sang a different tune. So what does all this mean? In an age dominated by true crime podcasts, TV, and documentaries, we've come to associate DNA tests as the golden standard of truth. But what happens when you have DNA from one test that says coyote and another that says wolf? Cards on the table? I am a science writer, not a scientist. So I had no idea how to answer that question. But I knew someone who could. Bridget Von Holt is an evolutionary geneticist at Princeton University, and she was contacted to conduct the tiebreaker DNA test, if you will. And before I get to her findings, I want to talk about how she found them. Von Holt has assembled the most robust collection of North American canid data on Earth, with genome-wide data from more than 3,000 gray wolves, red wolves, Mexican wolves, western coyotes, eastern coyotes, various foxes, and weird domestic dog breeds, including dog-wolf and dog-coyote hybrids. And she can use that database to parse differences between animals that other labs can't even sniff at. This means that not only can she identify species, but she can tell the difference, say, between a gray wolf from Montana and a gray wolf from Wisconsin. Trying to explain exactly how Von Holt's methods are more complex and thus more accurate quickly plunges us into metrics most of us don't even want to understand, but let's try ever so slightly. For starters, while the first two tests looked at fewer than 20 microsatellites or specific locations on the animal's DNA, Von Holt's analyses work with around 28,000. Now that's still a far cry from the 3.2 billion nucleotides that make up a canine genome, she says, but most of us can accept that 28,000 of one thing is far superior to 20 of another. Let's look at it another way though. Remember the old parable about the three blind men touching an elephant? Each one touches a different part of the animal, the trunk, the flank, the tail, and arrives at a wildly different conclusion about what that animal might be. Well, the first two testing services would be like taking a single finger and poking the elephant fewer than 20 times. But Von Holt's analysis would be more like using your whole hand and giving the elephant a deep tissue massage. Or something. All of which brings us to Von Holt's analysis, which states unequivocally that the New York mystery animal was a wolf. And not just any wolf, but a wolf with a genetic lineage that hails from the Great Lakes. So, case closed, right? Well, there's one question I really wanted to answer, and that was what to make of the state of New York's initial findings that the animal was a coyote. After all, they did a DNA test, and even though it included much less resolution than Van Holt's, it begs the question, can a DNA test be flat out wrong? Looking at the text of the report, there are two sentences in the results section where the rubber seems to meet the road. The first says the animal was a 65.2% match to wolf and 34.8% match to coyote, which would seem to suggest to most of us that the animal was a wolf. So why did the state say the animal was a coyote instead? Well, probably because of this next sentence. The report reads, the maternal lineage of evidence item 1 was identified as 99.9% coyote. 99.9% coyote? That's a lot! What are we even talking about here? No wonder the state went with coyote. Except, people who actually work in this field will tell you that the maternal lineage evidence is kinda, sorta useless. At least for answering the question of whether the animal was a dog or a wolf. And the reason why is both bizarre and super duper interesting. According to von Holt, the maternal lineage marker is based on something called mitochondrial DNA. And the neat thing about that is that it only comes from your mother. Everybody has mitochondrial DNA, in other words, but only females can pass it on. This means I am a dead end for the mitochondrial DNA hiding inside my genome, but also that my kids possess mitochondrial DNA from my wife only, which she received from her mother, and she from her mother, and on and on.
Well, you know how these things start. One guy tells another guy something, and then he tells two friends, and they tell two friends, and they tell their friends. And so on, and so on, and so on.
So you might think that the fact that the New York mystery animal had mitochondrial DNA from a coyote would also mean that its mother was a coyote. And this would mean that the animal would have to be at least 50% coyote, but you'd be wrong. In fact, all it tells us is that somewhere, somehow, a female coyote is part of its family tree. Hypothetically, it could have been the animal's mother or grandmother or great-great-great-great-grandmother, and that maternal lineage would still point to coyote, even if the animal is mostly wolf. To explain this differently, imagine a male wolf and a female coyote mated, which is something that can happen. The offspring of this pair would be 50% wolf and 50% coyote. But importantly, they would still possess the coyote mitochondrial DNA because the mother was a coyote. Now, if one of those offspring then mates with a wolf, the percentage would change so that the next round of offspring would be 75% wolf and just 25% coyote. But again, they would still possess mitochondrial DNA that screams coyote. Run it again and again and again, and you get offspring with more and more wolf DNA and less coyote DNA. And yet, if you look at the maternal lineage or the mitochondrial DNA, you're still going to see evidence of that original coyote. Confusing, right? And yet, also fascinating. Now, I can't say for sure whether the New York DEC misinterpreted this information, which, let's be honest, is easily misinterpreted, or consulted someone else who misinterpreted it, or maybe willfully misinterpreted so as not to have to deal with the repercussions of having a confirmed wolf in their state. To their credit, I can at least say that they have since embraced the results of the 2 DNA analyses that confirmed the animal was a wolf. For my part, though, I think there's an important lesson to be had here. First, every single day, each of us is bombarded with more information than we are equipped to understand on our own. And that's okay. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be the economist who specializes in the causes of inflation or a lawyer investigating tax law violations. At the same time, I know dang well that I could never do what von Holt does as an evolutionary geneticist. But I think the New York wolf is also an example of why we need to not only seek out experts to help us understand the world, but that we need to seek out the right experts. And the flip side of that is that it can be good to acknowledge the limits of our own knowledge and expertise. You can't know everything about everything, despite what some people on Twitter and cable news would have us believe. But by trusting experts, embracing new information, and searching for context, each of us can more fully fathom everything happening all around us. Anyway, I'm just a guy writing a book about animals, and I'm talking to experts every day that blow my ding-dang mind with new ways to look at the creatures all around us. If that sounds like your jam, you can subscribe to my Sorta Funny Field Guides newsletter, which is 100% free, or follow me on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks.